classes. Students write down everything they can. I mean, and then if they don't, if I go on to something else, then they just skip to something else. But I once asked a student, I said, what did you think of, this is last year in FYU, what did you think of the lecture? And she said, well, I didn't really hear too much of it. I was taking notes. And I think that that's the case. It probably is true that there are lectures that you're going to encounter here that you've probably sat through where you really are going to be responsible for everything that's said, but that's not really what I'm going to do here today. This isn't Professor Kornfeld called them the transmission model. That's kind of what I'm going to be, but I see that more as a transcription model, that you write down everything that you can. But I just assume you take as many notes as you want. You know what you need to do with the notes. You know that it's now you know what the document is that you're going to produce, the reflections. But I just assume that every now and then you kind of think about something I'm saying rather than just trying to write it down. So that's all. But if you want to write down everything, that's okay too. Well, I guess I should start with just telling you what I think history is. It seems like a good place to start. You might not be surprised to hear that historians spend a lot of time trying to figure out just what history actually is. But here's the way that most of us, at some time or another, in some way or another, every history professor is going to tell you this, whether you hear it in words or not, that history is the study of change over time. If things didn't change, there really wouldn't be the need to study history. It would be something else. We'd be studying sociology or anthropology or any number of things, but not really history. So it's the change that we're interested, or I should say, in addition, that sometimes things don't change, that you'd expect them to change. You'd think something's going to be different, but they're not. And that's pretty notable too. So that's what it is. We're looking at change, and time is our dimension. That's where we're operating, just like geography is about land or anything else. Ours is time, it's also a story. And that's the best history, and perhaps you haven't even encountered it yet, but the best histories are great, really great written stories. But the problem, and one thing that kind of trips people up, is we don't really know how it's going to end. And even some chapters that we think are over, just as I think perhaps you've kind of picked up on, or maybe not, but this idea that the Civil War ended in 1865, which is what you would have seen there, I don't know, a couple months ago, it doesn't seem to be over. So that's a kind of an issue in history, that we don't really know where the story is going to end. Here's another idea, another way to think about history, and that's something that kind of relates to things I think you've talked about in your class, and that's the relationship between agency and structure, the notion of human beings and what they do on their own through their own initiative, smashing into structure. There are institutions and laws and customs and expectations. And there are people, including, I suspect, most of you, that at some point or another, you just smash into it. And sometimes the structure gets changed, sometimes the agent gets changed. And sometimes nothing really permanent is done. But I think it's a pretty good way to think about history, too. So just wanted to clear that out at the beginning. So here's my argument. Can history really help us shape our identities? And so my biggest, I'm going to give you kind of an argument with a couple subsets, but here it is, that history, it really is a tool that can help us shape and form our identities. It's a space where we can challenge and even reform our characters and ourselves. So by studying history, we can find characters, we can find agents that we find inspiring, and maybe go out and do something about our own selves. And it might be tantamount to, when you go out and you're gonna travel around, you're gonna go study in foreign places, and people say, well, you'll widen your perspective. You'll see the way other people live. Well, it's the same in our history, just kind of in a vertical way that you can. It doesn't mean that things are right or wrong in one place or another. It doesn't mean that things are right or wrong over time. So that's my biggest argument, that it really can be useful, and I know that for a fact because that's in some sense why I'm here, but that's another story. And here's the subset to this, because I think there's a lot of ways that history forming identity is a useful subject, but I want to talk, this is what I'm going to speak about today. In the past, words and concepts had different meanings than the ones we take for granted today. And just as an example, historians were really valuable, instrumental in getting the marriage laws changed about gay marriage. Historians filed appendixes to briefs in lots of different courts showing that the word marriage hasn't always meant the marriage of one man and one woman. So it's kind of useful there, but the point here is that the word marriage has changed. It's changed over time. It hasn't had a universal perpetual meaning. So these alternative concepts of words might be useful to us. Again, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. The whole point of this, and what we're hoping that you get, is what's useful for you. These concepts, maybe you can find one that'll be useful in your life. So let me turn to the particulars that I want to discuss today. And there's two words here. Well, they're kind of interrelated. Fame, the word fame, and the concept, the term self-made. They meant something very different to people in the 18th and 19th century. I'll put up a timeline in case those
line.
But our conceptions are very, very different than they were a couple hundred years ago. Maybe their conception, maybe you think like, just to consider the way they thought, maybe it would be helpful to us. So they might provide some inspiration and some insight. It's different ways of thinking about those words. Words it's always meant the same thing. That's certainly not the case.
It's better, like it's quieter.
So let me just flash up the timeline again. I just want to give you some sense of what I'm talking about. Most of the things when I talk about the 18th and 19th century, let me show you what I'm talking about. And I just put this together. So I might mention Benjamin Franklin. He was born early in the 18th century. Washington, born in 1732. The French and Indian War, where Washington has his first combat. Important for him is 1754, but the revolution starts in 1775. A good 14 months before we declare our independence. And then the treaty ends, the war's over in 1781, the treaty's not until 1783 in the Constitution. Washington becomes the first president. And then again, just for sense of perspective, Lincoln's born, and then 1861, the Civil War starts in 1865, and then, as you know, Lincoln's assassinated just a week after the treaty signed. That's courthouse. All right, so let me just get to those words I was going to talk about, those words that I consider. So what does the word fame mean in contemporary popular culture? And I wish we were in a seminar meeting and I wish we had more time, because I'd really be interested, but some of these things I've kind of pre-tested with this section. So I'd love to hear what your perceptions are, your conceptions of these words, and maybe we can talk about them at the round table. But for now, let me go ahead and just kind of put up some of the words, some of the ideas that have been shared with me. And for the most part, today means celebrity. That's what fame means. It's the contemporary sense. It's synonymous with celebrity. And when does that start? When does fame become famous? Fame and famous seem to be the same words. When does that start? Well, I think we could point to the 20s, the 1920s, when there's tools of mass communication, like radio and movies, and they become nationwide. People all across the nation can know one person. And what really is the test about, it seems to me anyway, the test about fame in this sense, celebrity in this sense,
you just have to do something that gets you noticed. That's what fame is. It's notoriety. I mean, how would we measure fame today? Would it be how many likes you have? I don't know, likes or retweets or something like that. Would that be a measure of your fame? I think perhaps it would be. So we have some kind of objective sense of that. But what did it mean in the 18th and 19th century? And that's what I want to speak about. Before I do that, or as I'm doing that, I want you to consider something. You ever think about what a Hall of Fame means? I mean, why would we call something the Hall of Fame? Is it a measure of how well known somebody is? Is that what? I mean, the people are voted into the. We've got the freshwater fishing Hall of Fame in Wisconsin. Are they voted in there because that's how many people know who they are? Are people voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame because that's how many people know who they are? It doesn't seem quite right. So maybe it had a different meaning. And here's actually the first Hall of Fame in New York that was built around 1900 up in the Bronx, New York. It's still there now. It's now the campus of the Bronx Community College. And it was this big building made by a famous architect. And it's filled with busts of these famous people who were put in there, or people that were renowned at the time. Maybe names you wouldn't really know, but there's this different sense of fame, don't you think? I mean, it's not quite, it can't be what we mean today. So what did they mean? And I'm taking I had an idea. I was just gonna, I'd say, well, I'll play a song from Hamilton now, and I'll play a song from Hamilton now, but I kind of think I got talked out of that. But here's a title of a song from Hamilton, and it said, "History has its eyes on you," and that gets closer to the sense of what fame meant to people in the 18th and 19th century. Fame meant public honor and glory. So it's a public sense of achievement, of something that you've done. What you're known for doing something that's honorable, not just for doing something that's notorious or gets you notoriety. They thought that back then that fame would require a conscience that would inspire noble and admirable action. You need to have something in yourself that would drive you to do something that you'd acquire fame. That's how you earn fame. It wasn't just a measure of how famous. In fact, I tried to find some examples of whether the word famous, the way we use it, was ever used back then. I couldn't really find any. But fame certainly was. Fame, the word fame was used. Fame would be earned through the action of a great man who stood out, towered over his peers. And what's really important, then, I think, if we're going to take anything out of this, they saw the pursuit of fame as a way of transforming egotism, about just being concerned about yourself, and the pursuit of selfish aims. They thought that fame would transmit that into noble public service and the promotion of the commonwealth, of a sense that there's a common good. Fame could do that. In fact, here's a couple words from Federalist number 72. Perhaps you remember reading the Federalist. This wouldn't have been one that you necessarily would have read. But this was one that was read by Alexander Hamilton. He said, written by Alexander Hamilton. And here's what he says. Quote, "The love of fame, the ruling passion of the noblest minds, would prompt a man to plan and undertake extensive and arduous enterprises for the public benefit." So it's not just doing something that people know you about.
Doing something good for the public, doing something good for the commonwealth, for the commonweal. Fame would last into the future. It could only be earned. It couldn't be inherited. So John Quincy Adams, who would have been known because his father was president, but he didn't achieve fame by virtue of the fact that he was the descendant of John Adams. He had to earn it. And it is the sense that it goes into the future. and it would be recognized. Renown that would last far in the future, they were concerned with posterity's judgment of their actions, that people in the future are going to judge them, are going to wonder about what they had done in their lives. So, in a way, it's kind of a quest for immortality, isn't it? Isn't this a way that they can establish their immortal lives? That's kind of what they're looking for, I think. They want people to know who they were. They want to know the good things that they've done, bad things maybe not. But this immortality, I think when you kind of boil this all down to, that's what they're looking for. That's what they're trying to get. And that might not be something that anybody who's famous today would ever think twice about, but it was important to them. Can the desire for fame go too far? This public honor, to defend your honor, could it go too far? Well, maybe Hamilton's a pretty good case for that. You might not know much about Hamilton, but you probably know that Hamilton died in a duel, and he was over defending his honor. His son died in a duel just a couple years before, defending Hamilton's honor. So, sure, it can go too far. At least in my estimate, it can. But now that I've brought up Hamilton, let me just mention, and we'll turn to Hamilton, the musical. And I'm not really going to, one of the advantages of getting older is that you stop trying to convince people that the things you like are the things that anybody else should like. How many of you know Hamilton? I'm just curious as much as I think. All right, so everybody. How many of you listen to Hamilton at least once a day? All right, a couple. All right. How many of you had the opportunity, the great opportunity to see Hamilton in San Francisco just a couple months ago? A handful of you. I'd be a little bit embarrassed to tell you how many times I went. My wife got very adept at getting tickets. Paying face value, but we weren't paying the premium. She'd just look online, and a couple days before each performance, she'd get tickets. So I saw it, as I say, I'm not going to really tell you how many times. It would sound kind of silly, but and I can't really explain. I wouldn't say it's the greatest work of art I've ever seen, but I've never been affected emotionally like I have been by Hamilton. And I'd sit in the theater, and I'd be around. There'd be 10-year-old girls and people older than me, and it's just amazing how it affected so many people. So that being said, I hope that you get the opportunity. It's going to be back in 2019 in San Francisco. It's not that far away. I really hope you get the chance to go. But I'm going to ask Scott to play the Tony people have been very, the Hamilton people have been very careful about making sure very little gets onto the internet. But this is from the Tony Awards from a couple of years. So this goes for a couple of years ago. So let's watch this. It kind of gives you a sense of, I think, let me set it up. The first characters you see are George Washington and Lin-Manuel Miranda, the author, the creator, the lyricist, wrote the music, the composer, and he's also the star. So he's playing Hamilton, and Washington's there. And this is towards the end of the Revolution. Hamilton had been Washington's closest aide, but Hamilton, throughout the war, wanted to get his own command, wanted to go out into battle, because he thought that would bring him more honor, more fame, than just being an aide to Washington, even though that was an important position. So what you see here is kind of a segue from the song before, where Washington sings, "History has its eyes on you. History is going to be watching you from now on in." And they sing a couple bars of that, and then it goes into a song called Yorktown, which is a kind of a song about the very final battle in the Revolution, where the Americans win with the very important, essential help of the French. So I think the rest of it will make sense to you. So let me turn off my mic and...
Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? I know that we can win. I know that greatness lies in you. But remember, from here on in, history has its eyes on you.
if I'm given the chance.
We'll be with you when you do.
Go lead your men.
See you on the other side.
Till we meet again. Let's go.
Shot. I am not going away, my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm not scrappy and hungry.
Waves that white handkerchief.
And just like that, it's over. We tend to our wounded, we count our dead.
Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom. Not yet. We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile.
I kind of a bet with myself to see. I've seen this, I don't know, 20 times, and every time I see it, I had tears streaming down my face, and I was just curious to see if I was going to be standing up here with tears in my eyes. I managed to avoid doing that, but I don't know why. I mean, I have a pretty good sense because I thought about it, but I really can't put my finger on what the emotional reaction that I have. But I know I'm not alone, so I hope you, as I say, I hope you all get a chance to see it. The genius, and you can't, if you don't know the music, you can't quite see it or the lyrics, is that how many other songs he was quoting in that piece. I mean, he takes these things that he said before, and it's just a work of genius. Take my word for it. All right, so we get fame, and you can see, I mean, this is Hamilton's quest for fame. But I had another word up there, and that was self-made. So let's talk about it. And here's another word that I've kind of pre-tested with students, because I'd love to, and this would be something. I mean, just to, to kind of figure out how you think about this word. I mean, it's a word in popular culture. And sometimes when you go to define a word, sometimes you can put your finger on the essence. You can say, that's what it means. And other times you kind of say, well, you know, she's self-made, he's self-made. And so that's what I don't know if I could put my finger on it, but let's see if I can just name a couple people that have come up, including my brilliant section, that our family up in the corner. We pre-tested it too. And they came up with this one, Oprah. I mean, does she seem, she's self-made? Well, I mean, perhaps you know her story. You know, she started off pretty, let's call them humble circumstances, single mother, young, and she really didn't have much of a background beginning. And she certainly, I don't know if there's a richer woman in the world, but she, you know, however we're going to define it, I mean, I don't know. Would you think she fits in there or not? I wish I was like Professor Ayala. I could have you all hooked up and you could click in right now. But what do you think? Do you think that Oprah fits in that category? I see some nods. Thanks for those of you going to that extent. Thank you. I think so. And my pre-testers in my section from last year thought so too. And here's another one that came up actually. So I did this. I tested last year. I tested this. So who's this? So, whoops. So it's Steve Jobs, and he, you know, I don't know if you know much about his background, but he had that kind of a hard, you know, background. He was kind of left as an orphan with a family and controversy, but he worked his way up, and he made a fortune, right? He made a lot of money. So my people I talked to seemed to agree that was the case. What about her? What about Beyonce? You think she fits in the self-made category? She certainly got a fortune. I don't really know that much about her background. I don't know. Maybe she does, maybe not. And here's another, the same kind of story. I don't know that much about him. That's Jay-Z, right? I hope I got the right photo. So I mean, it's kind of, I mean, maybe open to interpretation. And when we were talking about these folks, other suggestions were athletes, rappers that have worked their way up. I do note this one thing, and this is kind of parenthetical, is that the African Americans, and there were lots of them that were put up here, the assumption is that they started with nothing, that they came from families that weren't able to help them. I just think that that's an interesting kind of cultural preconception we have. It may be true individually, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. All right, here's another. So Bill Gates, does he fit in there? Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. We talked about that a little bit. I don't know if you know that. Bill Gates, wealthy father, Zuckerberg, private schools, Elon Musk. You know, so I don't know. I mean, they're certainly all rich, but would we call them self-made? I don't know. What about Barack Obama? He's kind of it seems like a sort of an outlier to this. I mean, he's going to be very, very rich, but he wasn't rich before he became president. So that's some issue. I mean, here you see Obama as he's leaving the White House. And then my favorite, absolutely, I think the most beautiful photo ever taken in the White House is Obama and this young boy feeling his hair. You know, you're just like me. So I don't know, Obama, maybe he's self-made, maybe not. There's Donald Trump with a young boy, and this is, boy, he's biased. He showed Donald Trump in a bad way. Well, all right, so let me get off this. I mean, this is the classic get off my lawn. I mean, if you would have said get off my lawn photo, this is it. The kids, you know, mowing the lawn in the White House. And here's more. So Donald Trump, is he self-made? It was important enough to him to say he was. He said, I just started off with a small loan from my father, a small loan of $1 million, and his father bailed him out anytime he got in trouble. Mitt Romney, who ran for president in 2012, it was important to him that he say he was self-made, even though his father was a very, very wealthy man. It seems to be important to us to know that somebody, what is it? They worked their way up, right? They worked their way up from the bottom. Here's just to give you a measure of how lucky I am for my family. Here's one that they came. This is more advanced than any of my history students would have come up with. Did anybody know who this is? It's John D. Rockefeller, who was one of the richest men perhaps the richest man who ever lived in America. And he really did work his way up from the bottom. His father was a con man, bigamist, and so he go on to be the richest man. And then here's one that's even more amazing, more out there, and this is Herbert Hoover. I have to give Raphael personal credit. This is just a brilliant catch here, brilliant call, because Hoover was the same kind of way. Hoover was the president before Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he worked his way up. He became an enormously wealthy man and then went on to become president. So we kind of thought that these people were self-made, but however you define it, that's all well and good. So what does it mean? There's one thing that seems to be in common for all of them, and that's that it is the self, the subject in that sentence, I, the self, making money. I mean, that seems to be what the bottom line of being self-made is, right? It's the self making money. I think at the end that most of the people that we're going to come up with that we'd say were self-made, there's something about that. Is that the same as it was in the 18th and 19th century? And here's one that came up, and it's Alexander Hamilton. Was he self-made? And here was one of the lines, the very opening line is, how does a bastard orphan son of a whore, and so on. How does he grow up to be a hero and a scholar? Was he self-made? Well, I think we kind of agreed that he was, but I think you find, if you look at Hamilton's life, that there's another aspect to it. He never was, we should say this, when he died, he wasn't rich at all. He never was rich. He never made a lot of money. But I think we could think of him as self-made, but in this other sense, in the sense of the 18th and 19th century. So just a little bit of background about Hamilton. He's born on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. Here's he's down in here. His mother died when he was young, and he was noticed because he was a brilliant young man, noticed by these wealthy planter patrons. People were going to help him, sent him to the mainland, sent him to New York. And he arrived in the greatest city in the world. Lin-Manuel Miranda was absolutely right about that. He lands in New York, which is the greatest city in the world, in 1772. And then he goes to King's College, it's now Columbia, and he got involved in the resistance before the revolution was fought. So he's involved in that. Put this man put the boy in front, let him talk. During the war, as I said, he became Washington's most trusted aide. And Washington didn't want him to go out on the field. He wanted him to stay with him until the very end. Hamilton was a participant in the Constitutional Convention, 1787. He co-wrote those Federalist Papers that perhaps he slogged through in high school. He wrote by far the most of them. All this to convince people to ratify the Constitution. He was Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury. So, this is really, really important position in the very first administration. I mean, they're kind of making this up as they go along. So he is often credited as being the founder of the American government, not America or anything like that, but the government, the structure of the government. And he certainly is also credited with the creator of the American financial system. So these are all things that he was involved in. But he was a bitter political opponent of Jefferson and Madison. Many of the things that we teach in history about American history, the debates that go on in American history, are still, they're kind of a recapitulation of Hamilton and Jefferson arguing. We're still arguing the same things that they were back then. That's how lasting both of them, their ideas were. So here, what can we tell about Hamilton? Let me just finish this up. He dies in a duel with Aaron Burr, the vice president. He was the sitting vice president at the time. I mean, we think our politics are messed up right now, but here's the vice president killing somebody else in an illegal duel. One of the questions that comes up in the musical Hamilton, which is based on a big, big historical work, did Hamilton purposely fire up into the air? Did he purposely miss his shot? Did he throw away his shot? That's an earlier reference. He's not going to throw away his shot. So what do all this mean? Just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But these people in the 18th and 19th century, what was important to them is that the self It's not that the self is making an object. It's not the self making money. It's the self making the self. That's what they were concerned about. And if Hamilton's self-made, it's in that sense, because he never made money. He was involved in the public all his life, but he never made a fortune. So it meant they were concerned about living a balanced life, living a balance between passions and your intellect. I mean, to balance those off, that you're making a self, not money. That this right to self-creation, of self-construction, of self-improvement, it belonged to everybody. This is all about fulfilling what you wanted to do. It's your dream. It's your hope. And this fame, which involves working for the public good, that's a part of being self-made too, to somebody who lived in the 18th and 19th century. And here's one thing, something to consider too. You know the words of the Declaration of Independence. It speaks about the right to life, liberty, and not property, the pursuit of happiness. If Jefferson and the Declaration had written life, liberty, and property, everybody would have known. They knew that phrase. It was floating around. Everybody knew that phrase. But he changed it. He put the pursuit of happiness. And who gets to decide that? It's yourself. Yourself gets to decide that. So that's the important part of this different way of thinking about the self. And that if you work for the public good, that's self-fulfilling in itself. And even in spiritual matters, like whether you were going to be saved or not, which was immensely important to them, even after, this is 100 years, 150 years after the Puritans have arrived, it's still important to them. But now they start to think that you have a choice. You could choose God. You could choose to redeem yourself. That's your choice. No one's predestined it. God hadn't predestined it for you. And this is also about making the self. Historians are one of there's lots of C words, there's change, and then there's contingency, and it's the sense that nothing in history is inevitable. So what if there hadn't been a Revolutionary War? Am I saying that you need that they needed a war to make themselves? Is that what you need to go out and make yourselves? You need to have the World War II or now World War III? I mean, is that what you need? Would they have been famous? I mean, these people. I mean, Franklin probably on his own would have been, but the other guys, maybe not. Washington would have been a mildly successful farmer. I mean, you probably wouldn't, slave owner. You probably never would have heard of him. And what would we think of Hamilton if he hadn't done all these things? Would he have been self-made if he hadn't landed in the greatest city in the world? I mean, if he had landed in, like Charleston or something, and he wouldn't have had the opportunity to be a great man? I mean, maybe not. Who knows? I mean, you can't run an experiment. But I think that they didn't need the war to prove their courage. That's not really the issue. I think what the war did is it expanded their visions of what it meant to form yourself. That it gave them a bigger perspective. And somebody wrote that it enlarged their life goals. I mean, that sounded like kind of clunky language, but I mean that's kind of what the war did. But you don't need the war. You don't need a war to do that. You can look around yourselves and see that there's things that have to be done, real challenges to us right now. So it's not the war that does it. I don't think we need a war to get us to that point. But it does mean enlarging the way you look at the world. And then there's also context. I mean, could Hamilton and Jefferson and all the rest, could they have done it in all the circumstances, in any circumstances? Probably not. I mean, this process of self-creation, it's not available to everybody in every culture, is it? And before the Revolution, it really wasn't available to most people. Let me just put up a portrait. Here's a guy, and who it is doesn't really matter. And I don't know how well you can see it, but and I'd ask you, and I think you'd all come up with it. I mean, he's making a claim, right? He's saying this isn't like this is a selfie, right? He made a contract for this. He has a portrait artist doing this. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars. And he wants to prove to you that he's some kind of person. He wants to prove to you that that he's rich, that he's a gentleman, and he's going to do it. He's going to have a wig on, and he's going to stand in a certain way, and he's going to have clothes that are fine and silk.
And so he wants you to think of him in some way. And so what is this portrait? I mean, this is a terrible question. This is guess what the professor's thinking. What is this portrait doing? Think of one of the textbooks you have. What is this? It's a claim, and then there's evidence. It's an argument, right? Isn't it? Isn't this portrait an argument? He's making an argument, I'm a gentleman, I belong in a certain place. Well, to be a gentleman back then, you had to be born to be a gentleman. It was very rare that it wasn't impossible, but it was very rare that somebody would work up to become a gentleman. So before the revolution, that really wasn't available to anybody. And some historians say that this change, that you could create yourself, was the most radical thing that came out of the revolution. Others say that it was only available to white men, so it really didn't matter much. So here's Ben Franklin. And since I don't have time, the fact is he came from a very, very poor family, but he worked his way up. He became one of the wealthiest men in America, maybe at the time close to the very top around the time of the Revolution. But he was really so concerned about making yourself that he wrote a book. He wrote his autobiography. The whole point to teach young men how to improve themselves. And here's a portrait of Franklin after the war. I mean, if you look at this, you don't see that rich man that Franklin became. You see somebody who's wearing pretty ordinary clothes. Probably maybe his hands are dirty from printer's ink, whatever. I mean, this doesn't look like the gentleman did before. This is what this is all about. That at this point now, it's possible for you to work your way up. Possible, of course, if you're a white man. I understand that. But for white men, it was possible. For women, slaves, Native Americans, not so much. Though if I had more time, I'd show you some examples. But did anybody know who this is? Can anybody figure out who this is? Well, there's Franklin, and that's Franklin too. This was Franklin before the Revolution, when it was so important to him that he would be a gentleman, that he actually he was afraid that people were going to think he was a poser, so he kept on waiting. He had made a fortune. He had learned the rules of gentility, but this is how he wanted to portray himself before the war. After the war, something very different. All right, I'm going to stop there. Hang on, I shouldn't say that. That's the wrong word to use. I'm going to switch for a second, and I want to just because this is sort of a testament to how much I've learned in the short couple weeks that I've been around my FYE family. I asked one of them, what does self-made mean to you? I go around asking lots of people that. And he said that it was important in the trans community. And I would never have thought about that. And I thought, well, I was just kind of curious. And so I went and looked at the YouTube, and there was a short clip for a trailer for another way of thinking about self-made. So I want to show this, and then I'll have some concluding remarks, and we'll be done. Anyway, Scott.
So as most of you know, we all have a gender identity, and usually right around 4 and 5, we start verbalizing, who we believe we are. And it wasn't different for me. I always, always, always felt like a boy. I felt trapped. That held me back from living. Congratulations, you're having a baby. Let's hope it's healthy. When it's around 4 or 5 years old, we'll let you know what gender it is, right? Because, it doesn't always mean because somebody, is born, with a penis that it's a boy. Some of the groups, or what are we doing there? Okay, come on. Walk down. So I say Max is the person who came into group and shifted the way the group was because he was brave enough to open himself up emotionally. I'll never forget that day.
I cried.
You cried so hard.
I came out to a close friend when I was 14 as transgender.
There is a lack of understanding about our lives and our bodies.
Phenomenal.
I'm not saying you have, lots of, anonymous or disconnected sex. You can be with somebody that you care about, you like, you're interested in.
But if I did have children, Tony, I'd want your sperm. And then I was like, oh wait, you don't have sperm.
Don't live in the someday one day, right? Bring yourself back in, live in the moment, and just be who you are.
So the point, there's one point of that was just as kind of to honor the person who told me about it. As I said, I learned something from my family every day. And the other was that the great historian of the American self, he said that the 18th and 19th century that was a battle, a contest to see who would get to choose who would have the capacity to create their own selves, to choose their pursuit of happiness. And he was pointing towards the Civil War, saying that this was about the slaves who that's what they earned at the Civil War. But to watch this, that battle isn't over. I mean, that still goes on to today. Who gets to decide what's going to fulfill you? Who gets to decide what's going to make you happy? So anyway, you've been great. I appreciate it, and I hope I see most of you at the round table.